Before they were known as the World Eaters, the Warhounds had a reputation for their ferociousness in battle. They were also known to fight honorably and pride themselves in their fury and courage above all else. To this legion, life itself was war, a conflict that never ended from cradle to grave. In the Legion of Astartes read this concept in its purest form. Failure in battle was not tolerated, surrender was never contemplated, and mercy was a quick death delivered to a foe that had fought with bravery. Cowards themselves deserved no more than savage butchery in the reward for their fears. This simple but brutal code of war was the Warhounds' article of faith, and they extended it to both their own numbers and their enemies. The Warhounds' first recorded engagement was during the Sapphic Liberation, where they served as a spearhead of shock troops, mounting direct annihilation assaults on enemy forces, both in open battle and fortified positions. They were able to carry the attack despite their then relatively small number by sheer courage and the fury of the violence they could unleash. After its initial battle, the new legion seemed to have been largely held in reserve by the Emperor during the latter unification wars, and right through the subsequent reconquest of the Sol system. This may have been done in case of a sudden reversal of the fortunes of war, or as certain veiled evidence implies, as a weapon to be unleashed in case of disloyalty amongst the Emperor's own. After the Great Crusade kicked off, the Warhounds developed a reputation for victory, although at a cost, and it was said that every assault they conducted ended in one of two ways: victorious slaughter or simply slaughter, either of which left the foe in no condition to resist further. However effective the Legion was, there were many who fought alongside them that found them also to be unpredictable, intemperate, and dangerous to anything that stood in their path, combatant, civilian, or otherwise. Rumors soon began to circulate that the Warhounds would put to the sword human auxiliary regiments of the Imperial Army they saw as failing them in battle, and they kept a guarded distance from other legions. It was noted by outsiders that the Warhounds' officers enforced an unusually harsh code of discipline in their ranks, which was indeed needed, as the Astartes of the Legion often proved fractious, and bloodshed between the Battle Brothers was far from uncommon. When they were reunited with their Primarch, the Warhounds were soon influenced by Angron's cultural beliefs and blood rites that would become an important part of the World Eater's core beliefs as the culture within the Legion shifted to ever more violent and bloodthirsty mores and values. These quickly echoed in the shifting skin of the Legion's own rites and ceremonies, and the martial traditions of old Terra, never strong in the Warhounds, who had prided themselves on their fury and courage above all else, disappeared altogether, were replaced by Angron's own red code of butchery and savage competition. When the newly dubbed World Eaters departed their training world of Bolt under their new master for the first time, it was under a new badge of the great fanged maw poised to crush a life-bearing world, an image that was to prove entirely fitting to describe what was to come. The arrival of the Primarch Angron brought a primitive, almost tribal unity to a newly renamed World Eaters, and Angron quickly became the example of warriorhood to be aspired to by this legion. His first and most dubious honor was to be the one Primarch to refuse the Emperor's benevolence and to turn his back on the Imperium's claim of conquest. Angron, master of his doom-slaved army, cared nothing for the galaxy worth of dreams and triumphs. He had wished only to die with those rebels who'd escaped the gladiatorial pits of Desha with him. This ragged army of brothers and sisters had been holed up in the mountains with carrion birds and snow bears for company, waiting to starve or fall in battle, whichever death came first. His legion was told of Angron's refusal of the Emperor's offer when they first met on Nuceria. Their Primarch had defied the Emperor, and the Warhounds did not hate Angron for his choice. They worshipped him for it. No Primarch better understood the bonds of brotherhood than one who turned his back on the Emperor, the Imperium, on life itself, so that he could die side by side with his brothers and sisters. To the legionnaires of the World Eaters, the mutilated, bloody, reeking, wrathful figure that stalked amongst them as their master swiftly became a kind of savage messiah, a greater warrior than any they had known, an exemplar of a brutal ideal of honor and combat that sank to their souls. Angron became to them their first master, displacing for many the loyalty they had once given to the Emperor, as Angron became their judge, their general, and a conqueror, whose banner they would follow into the depths of hell. Under his influence, the competitive, hot-blooded tension that had always roiled under the surface of the Legion's psyche was channeled and given form. Gladiatorial combat, never without blood spill, and when taken to its extreme, fatal, became both the crux of the World Eaters' training, honing their individual battle skill to a razor edge, and a vital outlet for the pent-up aggression and frustrated bloodlust of the Legion between war zones. Eventually, the World Eaters' thirst for battle was artificially amplified by the use of surgically implanted butcher's nails that were similar to the technology that had been implanted in Angron's own skull during the Nucerian gladiatorial training. Bloodletting was a very common practice carried out by the Astartes of the World Eaters Legion. Angron and his World Eaters were known to cut their hands and smear the blood on the visors of their helmets before going into a fight. As time went on, blood rites became more and more important to the Legion's rituals. This would eventually culminate in the corrupted War Master Horus turning the Legion's savage rituals towards the bloody-handed worship of chaos, in particular the blood god Khorne. Angron introduced his World Eaters to a new tradition known as the Triumph Robe. This was something that was shown to Captain Karn by his Primarch. Angron explained that before a battle, one would carve a line in one's body, and after said battle, you would either let it heal normally to show you were victorious, or would rub some dirt from the battlefield into the wound to show you were defeated. This would cause the scar to appear to be a red twist if victorious, or a black twist if defeated. Warriors could then keep track of their battle honors and gauge each other's prowess. Angron had the longest Triumph Robe within his Legion. A ridge of scar tissue began at the base of Angron's spine. It traveled up his backbone, then veered to the left and around his body, riding over his hips and curving around to his front. The length of his continuous scar seemed to expand and then thin again, plowing and gouging the skin in some places, vanishing entirely where the Primarch's healing powers had overcome it. The scar looped around Angron's body, spiraling up over his belly, around his ribs, towards his chest, a little past the right of his sternum. It abruptly stopped. Angron, it was said, had no black twists. When the Emperor spirited Angron away from his world on the eve of battle, where he was ready to give his life fighting side by side with his fellow slaves, he was denied the right to return to his world. He couldn't pick up the soil to make a black twist. Unable to wear his failure, he was bitter with the Emperor that he couldn't fight alongside them, and even more so, that he couldn't even commemorate them properly. One of the more bloody traditions introduced to the World Eaters were gruesome contests of head-takings between members of individual squads, various squads, and the chapter's companies and captains. This may just have been an easy way to confirm kills, but it had been surmised by Imperial scholars that the World Eaters saw the head of a foe to be important. It is unknown if the totals of collected heads were kept for just a single battle, a war, or a warrior's career. Though many of the rituals that Angron introduced into his Legion were frowned upon by the Emperor, it was only the practice of implanting his warriors with the butcher's nails that completely got Angron censured by the Emperor, and yet he continued to do it regardless. And no better campaign can illustrate this aggressive, just bloodthirsty desire for war like the Siege of Sarum. The very first known target to suffer the wrath of the World Eaters Legion after their Primarch Angron took control sometime in the last 2 centuries of the 30th millennium was the stellar wasteland of the Golgotha sector. The Golgotha sector was sited near the galactic core in the Segmentum Ultima, close to the real space warp rift known simply as the Maelstrom. Driving his navigators perilously close to death in the warp, Angron ordered his warship to form a single strike force aimed at the Sarum system. They came upon the besieged Adeptus Mechanicus station world of Sarum, on the edge of the Maelstrom. Founded during the Age of Strife and long cut off from aid, Sarum was besieged by the abhuman empire known as the Brotherhood of Ruin, who wished to take the Mechanicum's technological secrets for themselves. The tech priest of the Mechanicum's Red Jack cult had endured alone for ages, subjected to the predations of raiders and enemies all around them, with very little contact with distant Mars and the Forge world of Anvilis. They had been requesting for aid, and yet nothing had reached them. The World Eaters arrived as their saviors, smashing into the heart of the besiegers. Though dramatically outgunned and outnumbered, the World Eaters drew in close formation and smashed through the enemy armada. Once the enemy line of defense was breached, the World Eaters' fleet unleashed swarms of gunships and drop pods upon the planet's surface. In the meantime, baying for blood, Angron and his World Eaters ravaged the enemy armada, plunging in close so that the wildfire of their foes struck their own ship as often as those of the Imperials. Boarding torpedoes and assault rams screamed out from the World Eaters' vessels, slamming into the hulls of the terror ships and abhuman vessels. They disgorged the World Eaters in their unstoppable inhuman rage, turning the enemy ships into burned ruin. Meanwhile, on the surface below, abhuman cyborg troops and their orc mercenaries died by the thousands, unable to coordinate a defense against the unforeseen direction of an attack. The battle raged for hours, and the World Eaters took horrific casualties, but fought on nevertheless. The abhuman warlords foolishly sensed that at last the battle was turning in their favor, and they called upon reinforcements from across the planetoid surface to aid them. It was then that a false dawn flared blood-red in the sky above. Seconds later, a cyclonic torpedo barrage smashed into the surface all around the World Eaters. In their wake came hundreds of gunships and assault rams. These represented the World Eaters' second wave, led by Angron himself. These warriors descended upon the Brotherhood of Ruin like a god of wrath. Behind them came 17 great metallic cylinders, which disgorged the towering titans of the Legio Audax, who strode forth, weapons blazing. Seeing the shadow of the Omnissiah's wrath descending, the Red Jack Mechanicum emerged from their fortifications and speared the fleeing enemy with their barbed harpoons, dragging them back to their masters to rend. The siege of Sarum had been broken, and the Red Jack Mechanicum swore to Angron and his legion directly many oaths of fealty and entered pacts of mutual protection and support. This provided the World Eaters and their tech marines with a ready source of resupply and armaments far outside the Imperium's inner sphere. The campaign that was to follow would last 11 standard years, and see no fewer than 48 worlds and outposts ravaged and destroyed by the World Eaters, and 7 separate dangerous xenospecies, including a branch of the Lacrimal, which we talked about in a 40Facts video in the past. I'll put a link up above. They were rendered extinct, well, almost extinct, because check out the 40Facts that will explain. The fleet cut a swath of destruction through the waste of Golgotha, and even ventured into the perilous fringes of the Maelstrom itself. Of course, this campaign also destroyed the miniature stellar empire that the Crimson Priesthood of Sarum had established in the sector, but they were no longer in any position to fight against the Imperium that had saved them from destruction. Now, if you haven't checked out the new Angron model for the Horus Heresy line, please click the link in the description or at the end of this video, and I hope you guys are enjoying the World Eater lore. More lore to come, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first.